switch and it's on.
Okay. This one's on. Hello. Is this on? No, a little. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Hi. Okay. Thanks. I cannot tell from up here whether it's on or not. I apologize for the technical difficulties, which I feel like is just the story of the ballroom for me. But welcome. I'm so glad to see everybody here. My name is Milo Oburn. I'm the chair of Women and Gender Studies, professor of English, and I'm also the coordinator for our Disability Studies minors. I'm a white, middle-aged, masculine presenting person. I want to welcome everyone here and also listening via our live stream. This is, fingers crossed, our first annual lecture in disability studies hosted by the Department of Women and Gender Studies. Before we begin, I want to start with a big thank you to our co-sponsors. Those include Brockport School of Nursing, the Office for Student Accessibility Services, the Committee on Accessibility, the Department of English, the Department of Education, Languages and Instructional Design, and the Department of Journalism and Social Media. And also very big thanks to the students who are offering our live stream today from the Department of Journalism and Social Media. I also want to acknowledge before we begin today's lecture that the land on which Brockport's campuses stand is the stolen and unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, specifically that of the Onondaga or Seneca Nation. The context in which we teach, research, and work is that of white supremacy and settler colonialism, and we are working to build better relations with the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, our closest indigenous neighbors. In solidarity with them, we invite you to learn more about the recent attempt to build the stamp industrial project adjacent to Seneca land and to protest any further efforts that might destroy what is left of sovereign native land with similarly environmentally harmful projects. I'm going to start our introduction and hope we get slides up. Yeah, I think you're going to be here. Okay. I would now like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ajit Paul Mangat. Dr. Mangat is an assistant professor of English at Niagara University. His teaching and research focuses on the intersection of disability and race in contemporary American art and literature, with a focus on life writing and popular music. His work is published in the edited collections Care and Disability and Neurodiversity on Television, as well as the Journal of Popular Music Studies and America's A Hemispheric Music Journal. He is also the co-editor of an upcoming special issue of the Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, and is a contributor in residence for Synapse, a health and humanities journal. He is presently at work on a book project entitled Forms of Affiliation, Disability Life Writing, and the Socialization of Care, which considers how disability life writing imagines more expansive forms of networked care that extend beyond the normative family. I also just want to say we would love to hear your questions. Please hold them to the end. We'll have a time for Q&A after the talk. And without further ado, I think. Are we close?
We are. The slides.
They should be pulled up. I'm going to pull it up here in case that's what we need to do. My apologies, everybody. We're going to get the slideshow up, I promise. We just might have to switch to another. All right, I'm going to do this too, just so we have both. How's this one? This is better. Okay. I'm going to change them out. Thank you, Lex. Still good? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
To talk in here, or can I, like for the live stream, or can I just walk around and talk?
You can take this out. I would use the mic, but you can take it out right here. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm turning it now over. Dr. Ajit Paul Mangat, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Appreciate you bearing with us. I know it's probably been other places rather than Tuesday afternoon, so thank you so much for coming. Oh, yeah. I forgot my mic. I'm already messing up. I like walking around when I talk, so is this okay? Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Like I said, there's probably other places you'd rather be on a Tuesday, so thanks so much for bearing with us. First of all, obviously, thank you to Milo for making this happen. I know how much work events are to put on. Thank you so much to the students who really make all this happen, And thank you all much for being here. It's obviously more fun to give a talk when there's more people. I would love your questions. This is... Let's just hope no more issues happen. So to say this is a talk that eventually is going to become an article. So I would love feedback on it. Love to just talk to you about pop music. I'll be talking about Chaperone and Olivia Rodrigo. So we'll listen to some music this afternoon. So hopefully it'll be somewhat enjoyable for the next hour and a half that I got you here. Okay. All right. So my talk's entitled "I'm Not Actually Sad: Depression, Popular Music, and Feminist Sisterhood." All right, so Chaperone reveals in a profile by Kate Solomon, published this past September in the Guardian newspaper, that she had been diagnosed just that past week with severe depression. I got to walk over here to click this. All right, there we go. Roan acknowledges that she has every symptom of someone who's severely depressed, from brain fog and forgetfulness to poor focus and a very lackluster viewpoint. These symptoms correspond to the most recent Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5, which states that major depressive disorder, or clinical depression, is a common and serious mood disorder that is characterized by symptoms from an impaired ability to think, to tiredness and agitation, to a sense of worthlessness and suicidal ideation. Her symptoms, she explains, all clicked into place upon hearing her diagnosis. Roan states that she is coping how, according to her, anyone would, pragmatically, before sharing that she is in therapy twice a week. After revealing her diagnosis, Roan traces her depression to the social condition of being famous. I think, Roan suggests, it's because my whole life has changed. Solomon charts Roan's rapid ascent to stardom over the course of that past year, a rise that intensified during that summer. Solomon notes when Roan's debut album, The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, was released the previous September, she had appreciation from an intense online fandom. So her fan group used to be very, very small. Then from April to the time of the interview, Roan's monthly Spotify listeners grew from 1 to 45 million. In fact, during the week the profile was published, Roan placed 6 songs in the US Billboard Hot 100 chart. So she's one of these artists who was relatively unknown, then all of a sudden, in a short span of time, became super famous. Solomon cites word of mouth and viral footage of Roan's live performances, noting that her set at the annual Lollapalooza Music Festival in Chicago the previous month had broken attendance records. As Solomon puts it, Roan had gone from a cult-like to icon in less time than it takes to grow out of fringe. Solomon adds that Roan has been candid about how hard the experience has been. Indeed, Roan openly details the negative consequences of fame to Solomon, asking, "Going to the park, Pilates, yoga? How do I do this in a safe way where I'm not going to be stalked or harassed?" Roan stresses that she has no delusions that this is normal. Her life now, she puts it, is very abnormal. So I will in my talk this afternoon, is it afternoon or evening? I guess this evening, explore a tension, which I hope may already be evident from my consideration of this interview, between the medicalization and social construction of depression and disability. So I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with disability studies, but maybe I'll just give a quick overview of what I mean by this. The medical model of disability regards a disability as a physical or cognitive dysfunction residing in a body or mind, a dysfunction that should be corrected or cured by medical intervention. Among disability studies' contributions is this interrogation of this model of disability, which remains a dominant framework. In contrast, disability studies advances a social model, contending that disability is a social construction, a set of social exclusions, obstructions, and derogations imposed on persons who diverge from a dominant able norm. So there's a lot of big language and theoretical. I'll explain this throughout my talk today. What I'm going to try to do today is like 3 or 4 things, okay? So first, I'm going to look at this tension between depression being medicalized, right, this thing that's bad, that's pathological, should be cured, and the social construction of depression, which is the idea that actually depression is caused by outside forces, like, for instance, maybe fame, right, which seems to have affected Chaperone. So what I'll do today is I'm going to do a few things. So I'm going to start by looking at Chaperone. I'm going to look at her some interviews she's given, her music, etc., and show how there's a tension in how she understands her own depression. At times, she medicalizes her depression, right, through the medical model. But I want to kind of read against it and show how she actually shows that her depression is socially constructed. It's coming from these social forces, okay? Then I will put her alongside Olivia Rodrigo, who's her friend and collaborator. And I'll show how Olivia kind of goes further than Chaperone in showing how depression is socially constructed. I'm also interested in Olivia Rodrigo because she's Asian American. She identifies as Filipino American. And so she adds race to the social construction of depression, shows how racism also affects her and makes her depressed. Okay. Then what I'll do is I'll say, well, what do we do about depression, right? How do Chaperone and Olivia Rodrigo deal with their depression? What they show is that they became depressed because they felt isolated. They were alone. That was a cause of depression, what I call social defeat. And then what they've done to deal with the depression is form what I call like a feminist sisterhood. They've created a community to help them with their depression, with the effects of fame, etc., right? So I'm interested in that sisterhood they've created, and I want to argue that that's how we should deal with the depression, right, is by creating communities. That's how we help people who are depressed. And then finally, I'll end by showing how they don't just have these depressed and negative feelings, but also they have these positive feelings. I want to show how they're both very political, and how these seemingly depressed feelings can actually be more political and create change in the world. Okay, so there's a few things I want to look through today. Obviously, I'll take it slowly over the next like 30, 40 minutes. Okay, so hope you bear with me. We'll listen to music as well, so hopefully it'll be fun. All right. Maybe I'll just, I forgot to click through here. This is not, it's not coming up on the screen. Okay, there we go. Okay. So anyway, so I'll look at how Olivia does this, and then her and Chapel, like I said, it was taking a second to come up here. Okay, how they're friends. So that's one reason I put them together, because they're friends. I'll talk about their tour, etc. Later on. Okay. All right. So Chaperone has described her childhood in a number of interviews as a difficult time when she felt miserable. Roan characterizes little Kaylee. Roan's birth name is Kaylee Rose Osmut. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there seems to be a little delay, so hopefully it's not a big issue. As a problem child who was angry, depressed, defiant, emotional, manipulative, and mean. Already at a young age, attempts were being made to medicalize Roan's erratic mood and behavior. The diagnosis of serious mental illnesses by the science of psychiatry, psychology, and psychoanalysis encompasses what Lamar Jarrell Bruce, in his book, How to Go Mad with Illusion Mind, refers to as medicalized madness. So medicalization is, as Bruce explains, the attempt to make sense of an intense unruliness of the mind, or phenomenal madness, that is experienced in the consciousness of the mad subject. As Roan details, while she was constantly fighting and kicking holes in walls, she was also going in and out of therapy. So at a very young age, Chaperone was having a difficult time, and her feelings, right, this depression, this anger, etc., were being medicalized. She went to therapy at a very young age. It was not until the age of 22 that Roan's intense unruliness of mind was given an official diagnosis. She was diagnosed with bipolar II disorder. On May 16, 2022, Roan opened up about her mental health struggles in a message posted to Instagram. She writes, "I don't talk about it much, but it affects me daily, and it's a pretty big part of my music. I'm in a healthy spot, just want to share, and I think it's important to talk about mental health, heart." Roan has credited her medicalization for allowing her to make sense of her symptoms. A year later, in another message posted to Instagram, she writes about her job makes it very difficult for her to process and maintain a healthy life and mindset. She offers her medical diagnosis as an explanation, proposing that she has difficulty regulating her emotions because she has bipolar II disorder. As Brittany Spanos puts it in her Rolling Stone profile of Roan, after decades of not understanding why she was so sad and angry, she finally got her answer with the diagnosis. Roan has also, in a profile by Audrey Fromson, published in 2023 in Vanity Fair, credited her diagnosis for offering her a clearer roadmap for treatment. She details being on meds while in full swing hypomania when her single Naked in Manhattan released in 2022, and in intensive outpatient therapy, individual therapy for 4 days a week during the release campaign for her next single, My Kink is Karma, later that year. Roan extols the benefits of the medical model of disability, describing being on medication and in therapy as taking care of herself. Such a model regards disability like depression to be dysfunction that should be corrected or cured. It was therapy, Roan explains, that saved her and her family. Having returned home to Missouri in August of 2020, feeling miserable after having been dropped from her label and ending a 4-year relationship, she credits entering therapy with her parents for helping her to realize that she could not go through her whole life hating her parents for not knowing how to handle a really sick child. Roan has thus often adopted the discourses of medicalized madness used by medical professionals throughout her life to make sense of her own phenomenal symptoms. So I've tried to show now is that Roan does use a medical model, right? She medicalized her depression. She goes to therapy to try to alleviate her symptoms. But now I want to complicate that a little bit. Yet Chaperone cannot be understood to simply accept her diagnosis uncritically. She points out in the Vanity Fair profile that took place after her diagnosis that bipolar disorder is one of the hardest to treat because you just don't know what's going to make you feel better. She describes the confusion she felt over the course of the 2 years of time it took to prescribe her medication. It was hard, she explains, because she kept asking herself, is it the bipolarity? Is it the meds not working? Is it my period? What Roan offers through these questions is a series of critiques of the medical model. First, she questions her diagnosis, wondering whether it is in fact her bipolarity that is causing her symptoms. Then she questions her treatment, wondering whether the meds are even working. What Roan questions, in other words, is whether medicine is helping or perhaps even hurting her. Roan approaches psychiatry with a critical ambivalence that, as Bruce explains, has been common among mad persons throughout history. He notes the harms that have been inflicted on mad persons by psychiatry, while also noting the healing and even empowerment that mad persons have found through clinical intervention. He proposes that we would be wise to rebuke the malicious modes of psychiatry while embracing its therapeutic potential. Roan has embraced the therapeutic potential of psychiatry while coming to recognize and reveal the limits of the medical model. Roan describes being surprised when her psychiatrist diagnosed her with severe depression. She states that despite having the symptoms of someone who was severely depressed, she did not think that she had depression because she was not actually sad. Roan experiences depression not as a feeling, but rather as a structure of feeling that exists to some extent outside of her individual body and mind. Roan experiences depression, to borrow a concept from the scholar Mimi Cook, as a larger structure of unwellness. Cook, drawing on her experiences as a disabled, unwell Asian American adjunct, argues that unwellness, which she emphasizes has come to encompass an entire way of being, is not an individual failure, but rather a result of living in a world that differentially abandons us. Cook wants us to understand that we are all differentially unwell, that people are vulnerable, made vulnerable, kept vulnerable. Roan's conceptualization of depression placed her in conversation with feminist scholars of disability. Feminist disability studies, scholars like the ones I'm going to put up here, argue that disability studies is a method that moves beyond the politics of recognition, representation, identity, characteristic of early disability studies, in order to analyze the intersection of systems of things like ableism and capitalism that assign less value to certain bodies and minds. Roan considers her disability in relation to the social system of gender, when she wonders whether it is her period that is actually disabling her. By questioning whether her experience of menstruation is being medicalized as madness, Roan can be understood to be an astute theorist of disability who offers valuable insights into the gendered experience of depression. She points through such questions to how forms of medicalized madness are infiltrated and sometimes even constituted by psychosocial forces. And here I get back into Bruce. And he says psychosocial madness is a radical deviation from the normal within a given social milieu. Bruce's psychosocial iteration of madness corresponds to the social model of disability, which contends that disability is a social construction. Disability, according to this model, is a set of social exclusions, obstructions, and derogations imposed on persons who diverge from a dominant able norm. Women's expressions of bodily pain have been ostracized as unreasonable, hysterical, and crazy, a troubling history that Roan's question gestures towards. Roan thereby avoids a common mistake in disability studies of treating the medical and social models as dichotomous. Instead, by considering her disability in relation to her gender, Roan emphasized the entanglements and convergences of the medical and social models. She experiences depression as both a painful biological reality and a social difference. Roan often struggles to articulate the social construction of her depression. She writes in an Instagram post from 2023 that everything is very exciting right now, and I'm realizing that success actually makes me quite uncomfortable and self-conscious, and I'm not sure why yet. Yet earlier in that very post, when she explains that she's working through as best as she can how hard she is on her body image, admitting that no matter what weight or how toned she is, it never feels like enough, she reveals that it is fame that is worsening her depression through these gendered beauty norms. In that more recent The Guardian profile, Roan uses a biological experience of puberty as a metaphor for fame. After again expressing confusion about her experiences, explaining that all her new emotions feel different as compared to when she was 12 and first went through puberty, she states that she was warned that becoming famous would feel like going through puberty again, before admitting that her body does feel different, holding tension in a very different way. She comes here to explicitly gender her feelings, stressing that only girls know how it feels. Roan is able to connect her disability to her gender by relating her own symptoms to those of other female pop stars, her predecessors as well as her peers. She describes looking at women like Lady Gaga and Lana Del Rey and Sabrina Carpenter going out in public and expresses sympathy, saying that she can't even imagine how much they've had to prepare for that. Roan describes, if not explicitly names, the persistent social structure of unwellness that has throughout history disabled even privileged women, sexism. So what I've done so far is I've tried to analyze Roan's understanding of her own depression. I've tried to show how at times she medicalizes her own depression, right? Arguing that depression's in her body and needs to be cured and fixed. Other times she says, well, actually, you know what, maybe it's my gender that's disabling me, that's making me depressed, right? Fame, and then maybe even sexism, right? So she starts to see depression as something that's socially constructed, as something that's occurring by these social forces that I've talked about, these structures of unwellness, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to Olivia Rodrigo and show how she goes further than Roan and looking at her negative feelings, what she calls sour feelings, as things that are caused by things outside of herself. So here we'll talk again about gender, but also race, because she is Asian American. Are the slides switching and stuff? They're okay? Yeah, okay. So Olivia Rodrigo rose to stardom as a musician, I'm sure all of you know, after previously working as a Disney child actress, with the release of her debut album, Sour, in May of 2021. This album was both commercially successful and critically acclaimed, going on to top year-end rankings at a number of publications, like Billboard and Rolling Stone, and break the record for longest charting debut album in the US Billboard 200 during this past century. It's actually the fourth most streamed album in Spotify history. What Rodrigo gives voice to on this album are the acute sour feelings that young people experience, like anger, jealousy, spite, and sadness. She notes that these feelings, when experienced by girls, are frowned upon as bitchy and moaning and complaining or whatever. If these feelings have been deemed as socially unacceptable, she remarks that she wants to shed a light on them to demonstrate that they are valid, right? So here, Rodrigo is not like Roan pathologizing her own emotions, saying that she's depressed or unwell. She's saying, well, no, these feelings are actually valid, and we should think about how they're actually things that many young girls experience. Critical examinations of Rodrigo's music have focused on gender. Lindsay Zolaz, for instance, refers to Rodrigo as a lowercase girl with caps lock feelings, placing her in a lineage that stretches from Joan Didion's canonical writings to Alanis Morissette's album Jagged Little Pill to the music of a more recent musician like Billie Eilish. Zolaz describes Rodrigo's songs as playing out like bottled up soliloquies. When Rodrigo does finally speak, after having felt previously unheard, her caps lock key is revealed, according to Zolaz, to be jammed on the inside where all her feelings are. For her, Rodrigo is challenging the gender norms of the historically male-dominated genre of emo music. Having described herself as very emo and working with a co-writer and producer, Dan Nigro, who was in an emo band, Zolaz concludes that Rodrigo is proving that girls have plenty to be emo about. What such critical examinations have failed to fully consider is how Rodrigo also racializes her feelings. Such an oversight can perhaps be attributed to the situating of Rodrigo within such a white lineage of music and musicians, with the influence of Taylor Swift, for instance, perhaps possibly overstated. Rodrigo's sour feelings correspond to what Hong refers to as minor feelings. Hong explains that minor feelings occur when American optimism contradicts the reality of being an Asian American, leading to cognitive dissonance. Rodrigo racializes her sour feelings as minor when she explains that it feels like if you don't have European features and blonde hair and blue eyes, you're not traditionally pretty. She admits that the feeling of not being pretty, due to not looking exactly like the girl next door in the movies, has been difficult for her to shake off. On her debut single, Driver's License, which topped the US Billboard Hot 100 for 8 weeks, Rodrigo imagines her former lover with that blonde girl. So what I want to do now is I'm sure we've all heard this song, but maybe just listen to the first minute or so, just to get a sense of her music, and then where she refers to this blonde girl. She has this frustration. Oh. Technology's not working, sorry. I think that's good enough. We heard her say, probably with that blonde girl. That's a line I want to focus on here. So what do I make of this, right? This song is famously rumored to be about Joshua Bassett, her co-star in High School Musical, the series, very long title, who soon after splitting with Rodrigo became linked to Sabrina Carpenter. Yet the history of this song troubles such specificity. In the original lyrics, the girl is referred to as a brunette, with the changed credit to Nigro, the producer. The descriptor blonde can thereby be understood to refer not to a specific blonde singer like Carpenter, but rather to a more general structural difference. By emphasizing the difference between her own brunette hair and this girl's blonde hair, Rodrigo is able to stress this blonde girl's whiteness. Sour can thereby be understood to represent the racialized feelings of insecurity and being unwanted that young Asian American women, even evidently pretty and successful ones like Rodrigo, struggle with. Rodrigo recalls that really strange age of 17 when she was working on Sour as a time when she was figuring out love and heartbreak. How she wanted to be treated by others and how she felt in the world. She wrote this song for that album in order to, as she put it, process these emotions. At the time, she felt this internal process was all she could do, shed a light on how she was feeling. Everything else, she concludes, was out of her hands. Rodrigo's description brings her sour feelings very close to what Sai Nye refers to as ugly feelings. Both Rodrigo and Nye call forth and call upon a new set of negative feelings. The sour feelings of jealousy, spite, and sadness for Rodrigo, and the ugly feelings of envy, irritation, anxiety, and paranoia for Nye. They do sort of theorize how during our contemporary socio-political moment, individuals feel a sense of obstructed agency that produces ambivalence rather than action. As Nye argues, in the transnational stage of capitalism, or what we now refer to as neoliberalism, our emotions no longer link up as securely as they once did with the models of social action and transformation. Rodrigo, during that strange moment of her life, can be understood to have felt such a resigned and pessimistic understanding of her own relationship to political action. I placed Rodrigo in conversation with these Asian American women, Hong and Nye, in order to demonstrate that Rodrigo theorizes a feeling or affect that is particular to Asian Americans. If, as Hong admits, her conception of minor feelings is indebted to Nye's notion of ugly feelings, so too I suggest are Rodrigo's reputation of sour feelings indebted to their ideas. Each of these women theorize feelings that are, in Nye's words, non-cathartic states of emotion, with a remarkable capacity for duration. Rodrigo concludes Sour with the song Hope You're Okay. And I probably won't play it, just because the system's not working. But as Zolaz points out, this song could have cleanly and cathartically closed a narrative loop of the album if written to the former lover of Driver's License. Instead, what it wishes for is far less hopeful. Not that the characters she sketches and her generation more generally become empowered, but rather that they all, and perhaps she too, just remain okay, right? So I've tried to show in the first kind of half of this talk here, like I said, with Chaperone, I showed how her depression really comes from outside of her body, right? The medical model says depression's in you, it's in your body, in your brain. Roan starts to show us how actually it's things like sexism and gender, right, that are causing her depression, these pressures. And what I've tried to show is how Rodrigo doesn't go beyond Rome, but complicates this even further, right, by bringing in race, right? It's her racialized feelings, these sour feelings, right, that she doesn't pathologize as bad, that she should get rid of, but rather like, what do they mean, right? Why do I feel this way, right? And so I've tried to show that also racism, right, and race contribute to depression, right? So thus far I've tried to show how depression should be understood as socially constructed. It's these social forces that can lead to depression, okay? So now I want to say, well, what do we do about this then? Well, if depression isn't in your body, but I'm not saying you shouldn't get therapy or take medication, that can be helpful, but if depression is socially constructed, how do we deal with those social forces? Well, what I want to do now is look at Roan and Rodrigo's sisterhood, right? And how it's a sisterhood of community and friendship and female bonds that allows them to kind of deal with these negative feelings, okay? So I want to look at their sisterhood now. All right. Sorry, I don't know if we'll be able to play any music because the system's not working well, but in her profile of pioneering feminist writer and activist Shulamith Firestone, Death of a Revolutionary, Susan Flutie cites the work of John Paul Selton and Elizabeth Cantor Gray, who found that the various risk factors for schizophrenia, from migration to racism to urban upbringing, all involve chronic isolation and loneliness, a condition they refer to as social defeat. And I want to think more about social defeat as actually maybe a cause of depression. Firestone, like other second-wave feminists of her time, hoped that forming a community of women or a sisterhood would alleviate her loneliness. She co-founded New York Radical Women in 1967, a group that was the first of its kind in the city and offering, as Flutie describes, a place where women got together to talk about their lives, a place where political principles crystallized through the sharing of each other's experiences. Flutie explains that Selton and Cantor Gray theorized that social support protects against the development of schizophrenia. So it's actually by forming these communities that we can actually prevent schizophrenia, according to them. Firestone would, however, soon be forced out of these various groups that she helped to form, a fate that would befall other feminists of her time. She describes in a statement cited by Flutie how each of us slipped back into our own isolation, knowing that two women who dropped out, as she had done, ended up in the hospital with nervous breakdowns. Having lost her support system, Firestone was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in 1987. The declaration made by the feminist T. Grace Atkinson that sisterhood is powerful, it kills, mostly sisters, describes the fate of Firestone, who after years moving in and out of hospitals, would die alone and forgotten in her apartment in August 2012. But luckily, her work's been rediscovered now. But what I'm trying to show is it's actually this isolation which led her to become schizophrenic and then die alone. So while Rodrigo and Roan, who don't actually suffer from schizophrenia, argue that they can actually be understood as they've also experienced social defeat at a young age, and it was that social defeat that contributed to their depression. So I'll focus on Roan now for a little bit. So Roan grew up in the very Christian, very traditional city of Willard, Missouri, which has a population of approximately 6,500. Roan, in her The Guardian profile, describes having felt very, very lonely. She reflects on how she pushed down the gay part of herself so deep, thinking that part could not possibly be her. As she put it, she was so desperate to feel understood. It was when Roan moved to Los Angeles in 2018 that she, as Solomon charts, finally found her people. She began to acknowledge her sexuality, living openly there as a queer woman. Roan would later come out as a lesbian. Roan emphasized that being allowed to be who she wanted to be changed everything. And so this change is evident in Roan's aesthetic development. I don't know if people know much about Roan's early work before her rise to fame recently, but her first ever song was a song called Die Young. Anyone ever heard this song, Die Young? A few people, okay. Which she uploaded to YouTube actually in 2014. And in my opinion, this song is all about social defeat. Now, I don't dare, should I try to play it or no? I don't know. Should I dare try? All right. All right. Obviously, I just want to play like a minute from it, just to show her evolution. Like, if you know Chaperone's music, you'll see how different it is from her more recent music. It's an ad right now, but. Seems okay. Can you hear it? A little bit, yeah. Okay. Let's see if it catches. Oh, sorry. It's just a little bit. Yeah, you can't really see it too well. This is the first song she made in 2014. It's kind of like a Lana Del Rey ripoff. A lot of people were doing that at the time. All right. I mean, you kind of see. I mean, I recommend watching it if you're interested. But my argument is that Roan was going through social defeat. Roan has stated that this song, which was written when she was just 16 years old, so around the same age when Olivia Rodrigo made driver's license, she was going through a tough time with her parents and making friends. She was, as she puts it, just with myself, really. On this song, she adopts a sad girl persona, which was very common at the time. Like Lana Del Rey was one of these people who used a sad girl persona. By contrast, Pink Pony Club, which I'm sure many of you know, which was written in 2019, was inspired by Rome's formative experience of visiting a drag bar in Los Angeles. So let's see. So I want to contrast these two. It's a little hard to see the visuals, but obviously Da Young, she's very sad. She's going through social defeat. But here, eventually we'll see, this is all about a different movement, right? From being closeted and repressed to open with her sexuality. It's much more joyous. Just a little bit. I'll play another few seconds and I'll go back. All right, so it's enough. Like I said, we can't really see the visuals too well. But what the song is about, it tells a story of a young girl escaping Tennessee to come to a special place where boys and girls can be queens every single day. So Roan describes the song as her attempt, after coming to feel constrained by her sad girl persona, to write a happy song. This is her first attempt to write a happy song. And this song, I would argue, is about how hope and community can actually defeat social defeat, right? So if at one time she was depressed because she was alone, right, the sad girl persona, by finding her community, by her queer community, she started to, have these more positive feelings and actually defeat that loneliness she once felt. But, right, Roan's life was not so simple. She came again to experience social defeat. Again, more recently. She reveals in the Guardian profile that a recent diagnosis of severe depression was preceded by the loss of her queer community that she had built. Salma explains that fame has robbed her of the community she spent years building. As Roan puts it, every time I walk through my front door, it just comes out of me. I can't even help it. I just start sobbing and either being so angry at myself for choosing this path or grieving how the curiosity and pure wonder I had about the world is somewhat taken away from me. Losing the sense of safety that her community provided her has left Roan feeling angry and grieving, and more susceptible to the development of depression. But again, more recently, Roan has worked to reconstruct a community to support her. A profile by Delia Kai in The Face, also published last September, begins as follows. Yes, Chaperone has been talking to all the girls. And then I'll put this way. Fellow stars have, as Kai describes, reached out to see if she's okay. Charlie XCX and Billie Eilish have kept tabs on her. Lady Gaga and Hayley Williams have passed along their numbers and offered to chat. Katy Perry and Lorde have provided advice. And Miley Cyrus even invited her to a party. What such a community of women allows for is what Cook terms a pedagogy of unwellness. Roan has come through conversation to understand, as Cook puts it, that we are all differentially unwell. Sabrina Carpenter, who also rose to fame during the summer of 2024, suggests that they meet up to unpack their summers. As Roan explains, we're both going through something so fucking hard. She just feels like everything is flying, and she's just barely hanging on. She goes on to stress that it was just good to know someone else feels that way. Meanwhile, she has commiserated with Phoebe Bridgers about how fans are becoming increasingly abusive and violent, and Misky has via email welcomed her to the shittiest exclusive club in the world, the club where strangers think you belong to them, and they find and harass your family members. Such a community of women, or sisterhood, whose members are predominantly white and straight, beautiful and successful, could be critiqued for centering heteronormativity at the expense of difference. Durba Mitra, in her History of Feminist Sisterhood, blames Robin Morgan for fortifying an exclusionary politics of global sisterhood. So, I don't know if you know Robin Morgan, she was a very famous feminist. So she did a few things that people have critiqued her for. One, she positioned American women as authorities on global women. Two, she defined women solely in terms of a demographic, biologically essentialized difference. And three, she sought to demonstrate the equivalence of women across race, class, and geography. Roan, by contrast, I would argue, has always made it clear that the point of the Chapel Roan project, which she describes in an Instagram post as our project, is to give back to the queer community that supports a project and brings so much joy to this planet. Rowan made the politics of her sisterhood clear when she turned down an invitation to the White House's Pride celebration last summer. She explained that her decision was due to a White House spokesperson stating that gender-affirming surgery should be limited to transgender adults, although the White House eventually walked that back. During her set at the Governor's Ball Music Festival last summer, while dressed as a Statue of Liberty, Rowan stated, "We want liberty, justice, and freedom for all. When you do that, that's when I'll come." Where Morgan based her sisterhood on the sameness of women, Rowan's inclusive vision of sisterhood follows Bell Hooks' teaching that there is no need to eradicate difference to feel solidarity. It is only such a feminist vision of political solidarity that can, as Hooks stressed, confront overlapping structures of domination. Rowan's appeal to the music industry during her acceptance speech for Best New Artist at this last year's Grammys to offer livable wage and health care, especially to developing artists, epitomizes her feminist politics of solidarity. Rowan can thus be understood to offer a sisterhood as a powerful political platform that Mitra argues we need today, one that intentionally reimagines normative kinship structures and explicitly subverts biological deterministic ideas of feminism to uphold transgender and queer living as a key priority in the 21st century feminist project. Recently, on the Call Her Daddy podcast, so a few months back over the summer, Rowan offered a critique of normative kinship structures. When asked if she would ever want to be married with children, Rowan responded, "All my friends who have kids are in hell. I don't know anyone, I actually don't know anyone who's like happy and has children at this age. I literally have not met anyone who's happy, anyone who has like light in their eyes, anyone who has slept." Rowan went on to state that her friends are just like their mothers, like they're fucking busy and they have jobs and lives. Here, Rowan identifies a cause of depression in women, the gender binary. She makes clear that women with children are unhappy because they're so busy, trying to fulfill the demands of being a mother, while also needing to find time for their jobs, their lives, and also sleep. In offering this critique, Rowan echoes the words of Shulamith Firestone, who I referenced earlier, who argued that the traditional family structure was at the core of women's oppression. Rowan gets at what Firestone believed was the roots of inequality, and in doing so, stresses the necessity of reimagining normative kinship structures like the family. All right, so I've tried to show now how Rowan, has dealt with depression in her life, and how it's a forming of these sisterhoods, queer sisterhoods, that have allowed her to feel better, deal with that depression, more than maybe the biological model, So I want to now shift back to Olivia Rodrigo and show how she has also faced social defeat, but based more around the issue of race, of being Asian American, and how she has also formed these sisterhood to deal with that, with those negative feelings. So going back to Kathy Park Hong, who I referenced earlier, writes about how Asian Americans inhabit a vague purgatorial status. They are, she explains, not white enough nor black enough. They are on the one hand distrusted by African Americans, while on the other hand ignored by whites. She does, however, note that Asian Americans are not ignored when they are being used by whites to keep the black man down. What has allowed Asian Americans to be used in this way is, as Hong puts it, the whole model minority quackery. This idea that Asian Americans are the model that other minority groups should follow emerges from the fact that some Asian Americans are doing better than other racial groups. What worries Hong is how this idea prevents solidarity. She traces how Asian American success was first popularized following the lifting of the 1965 immigration ban to undermine the credibility of black civil rights. She writes, "We were the good ones. Since we were undemanding, diligent, and never asked for handouts from the government. There's no discrimination," they assured us, "as long as you're compliant and hardworking." Hong emphasized that the Ma minority is a myth by stressing the toll that living up to such an impossible and made-up standard can have on the mental health of Asian Americans, describing how she herself became compulsive in her efforts to do better, be better, ultimately leading to her actually becoming depressed. This myth, she makes clear, does not, despite the belief of some, benefit Asian Americans, who she concludes remain splintered, with no sense of a we, to solidify them into a common collective. So again, this social defeat, this lack of community, and she identifies the model minority. But what I want to show now is how Rodrigo has pushed back against the model minority myth. Rodrigo, like Hong, reveals the challenges of living up to the standards of being a model minority. She sells a shirt on her official store with the phrase "perfect all-American bitch" written on the front. This shirt references the opening song on Guts, which is All-American Bitch, which some of you may have heard. I was going to play the song, but maybe we'll just kind of move forward for time. But I have the lyrics up here. She begins that song by referring to herself as a perfect all-American. Such a reference brings her close to whiteness, even comparing herself to a goddamn Kennedy. What makes Rodrigo the perfect all-American is that she acts like a model minority. She stresses her compliance, echoing Hong when she sings, "I Know My Place." Hong often repeats a phrase that Asian Americans are next in line to be white. What worries Hong is that Asian Americans are actually next in line to disappear. She writes, "We are reputed to be so accomplished and so law-abiding, we will disappear into this country's fog." While Rodrigo soon suggests that she don't get angry, she later admits, "I scream inside to deal with it," an admission that is further emphasized by repeated refrains of awe and the anguished phrase, "Oh my fucking God, yeah." By the time Rodrigo reveals at the end of the song that she cries, her delivery is escalated, as one critic put it, from pretty to blood-curdling. Rodrigo has described the repressed feelings and emotional turmoil that result from wanting to be this perfect American girl, while not feeling like that all the time. When Rodrigo explains that she can never admit her feelings of rage and dissatisfaction because she explains the need to be so grateful all the time, she echoes Hong's assertion that Asian Americans are required to act grateful in order to belong in America. But Rodrigo undercuts her status as a minority by adding the term bitch after perfect all-American. Far from a model minority, Rodrigo bitches. She thereby heeds Hong's call to Asian American women to talk so they do not walk all over you. Indeed, the back of her perfect all-American bitch shirt features an open mouth that is, one can assume, bitching, hollering, spilling guts. Rodrigo, as Gail remarks, challenges simplistic binaries between hard and soft, masculine and feminine, binaries that should be understood to even further restrict the lives of Asian American women. Rodrigo does so through representation. Rodrigo's band is made up entirely of women and non-binary musicians, which, as a review of her Guts World Tour noted, is actually quite rare at any level, let alone in arenas. She also invited Chaperone to open for her on the Guts World Tour, featuring her in the film of the tour that was released on Netflix. Here I propose we see the sisterhood that Mitra describes enacted. Two women, one openly queer and depressed, the other a sour Asian American woman, opposing oppressive gender and racial binaries through music and friendship. This is the solidarity and kind of kinship that I believe we need now more than ever. All right, I'm almost done. Just have one last part here. So what have I tried to show today? I've tried to show how, some people often adopt the medical model, but how Roan and Rodrigo move toward the social model of depression, right? It's these social forces that are causing them to feel these negative emotions, right? And how they've dealt with that by forming these sisterhoods, right? With each other, but also other pop stars and other people, right? Often queer, often racially diverse. So what I want to think about now is how can we actually see their emotions as more positive, right? These emotions seem negative, right? Jealousy, anger, sadness, but I think we see them as actually also political. Okay, and I think that's especially true in Rodrigo's case. So I want to end by thinking about their rage and anger and how they can use emotions for political ends. Okay, so a few more minutes and then I'll stop, and then hopefully we can have a discussion. Hopefully you have a few questions. All right, it's almost done. So now returning to Kathy Park Hong. So Kathy Park Hong, in Minor Feelings, laments the self-hating Asian. Hong explains that racial self-hatred results from racial minorities seeing themselves the way the racial majority sees them, which turns these racial minorities into their own worst enemy. The defense against this self-hatred for Asians is, she expounds, to be hard on themselves, which becomes compulsive and therefore a comfort. Hong describes how she would peck herself to death. You don't like how you look, how you sound. You think your Asian features are undefined, like God started pinching out your features and then abandoned you. Her primary concern is that such self-hatred diminishes the solidarity amongst and between racial groups. Asians begin, she worries, to hate that there are so many other Asians in the room, ask themselves who let in all the Asians. Hong does have hope for the future. She imagines at times, depending on her location, that the self-hating Asian might be on the way out with her generation. Hong expresses frustration with some young Asian women she meets in some classrooms who do not talk, but instead sit meekly like mice with nice hair, in her words. She admits to wanting to urge them to talk so they are not walked all over. By contrast, in other classrooms, like those at St. Lawrence College where she teaches, Hong meets students who are fierce, empowered, and politically engaged and brilliant. Hong refers to such Asians as the Asian 2.0. She stresses that these are the Asian women that we need, Asian women who are ready to holler. What I've tried to argue is that Olivia Rodrigo embodies the Asian 2.0. On Guts, which was released 2 years after Sour, Rodrigo still calls forth and calls upon sour or ugly feelings. She at one point conveys embarrassment, confessing to feeling like a goddamn fool for loving some weird second-string loser. She also tries to process the lingering confusion for having had her trust betrayed by a former lover, but misses having developed a grudge because she's not strong enough to forgive. Later, she makes a vulnerable claim that her pretty isn't pretty enough. Again, this album refuses to offer any closure or catharsis. On the final song, Teenage Dream, she expresses frustration at the saying that it gets better, worrying, what if I don't get better? Yet Guts, which is stylized in all caps, offers a journey through a wider range of emotional expression than found on Sour. Emily Gill notes that Rodrigo mixes her slow-tempo acoustic guitar and piano ballads like Lacy and Logical and soft, breathy singing voice with a punk-informed musicianship and ethos. Gill describes how she grits her teeth, gets shrill, and screams, both playfully and viscerally. Writes pop-punk that is hard-hitting, experimentally noisy, and danceable, and curses throughout the album, as on All American Bitch. Rodrigo thereby evokes some emotions that are far removed from the ugly affects that Cyanide theorizes. For Gail, the songs on Guts remind us of the awkwardness, joy, and funny hysteria of being young. For her, they feel good. For Rodrigo, music had come by the time she came to create this album to be about expressing feelings of rage and dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction, joy, rage. These are the classical political passions that Nye opposes ugly feelings to. Such less ambiguous emotions more securely link up, according to Nye, to social action and transformation. With the evocation of these social emotions, Rodrigo began to articulate a different understanding of what her music was for. Sour can be understood, as Nye might put it, to produce and foreground a failure of emotional release in order to theorize a shared condition of social powerlessness or even depression. Guts can be understood, by contrast, to produce and foreground a cathartic release of emotions in order to incite a kind of politics, direct activism. In other words, if the focus of Rodrigo's music had once been on the self, the internal processing of her feelings, Rodrigo came to realize that she could do more socially with her music. So how did this change? That's what I want to end with here. I suggest that what led to this change in music was the overturning of Roe v. Wade. During her set at Glastonbury 2022, just a day after this decision, Rodrigo, alongside English singer Lily Allen, dedicated Allen's song Fuck You to the 5 members of the Supreme Court, who she opined have shown us at the end of the day they truly don't give a shit about freedom. Now Rodrigo was confronting political injustice with her music. She was, in contrast to the past, taking matters into her own hands. Rodrigo could no longer be understood to be ruminating on her self-hatred when during her set she hollered, "We hate you," with her middle fingers flipped in the air. She made it clear, as Gail puts it, that teen girl feelings are not just legitimate, they are necessary. When she explained on stage, "I'm devastated and terrified. So many women and so many girls are going to die because of this." Rodrigo had become politicized. Roan is also, as she admits in the Guardian profile, confrontational. Bruce explains that people who express rage, an affective state of intense aggressive displeasure at unjust conditions, are often coded as psychosocial others and diagnosed as medically unsound. Roan has indeed faced criticism for her political statements. Her comments about motherhood, which I cited earlier, have been labeled misogynistic. She's also been accused by fans of being ungrateful for setting clear boundaries. What I've tried to do today is to extend to Roan, as well as Rodrigo, by contrast, what Bruce refers to as radical compassion, the will to care for, a commitment to feel with, a striving to learn from, and an openness to be vulnerable before a precarious other, though they may be drastically dissimilar to yourself. Roan and Rodrigo's rage, if harnessed, I have proposed, could fuel impassioned resistance to the unjust conditions that keep them and us depressed and disabled. Thank you. Sorry I didn't play much music. I wanted to play more music, but yeah, the electronics weren't working, so I do apologize for that. But yeah, any questions, I'm happy to talk. If you have any thoughts or ideas.
Hello?
Hello.
90% of the time, or more, I'd say I look at disability from the social model as an individual with multiple disabilities. But I think I disagree with that when it comes to depression, at least partially. Because absolutely those social make it worse. but I've had depression since before I even knew how to talk, to understand the world around me.
Right.
So for me, it just feels like it is a thing in my body, but it is definitely worsened by society and those factors as well.
I would say what you just said is pretty much what Roan says in a way. Like, I think that's not too dissimilar, right? Like I've tried to show, there's a tension in Roan's thinking about her depression, right? She often talks about, she has medicalized her own depression, right? She's like, I feel it in my body, I'm in therapy, I'm taking all this medication, and this has really helped me, she talks about, right? Whenever she's become too famous, she gets really depressed, and then she uses the medical model, right? Therapists, doctors to help her, right? And so, is depression biological? Of course, right? And sorry, I didn't mean to say it wasn't. It definitely is, right? And I think Roan would agree with that, right? But what I'm trying to show is that I think some people think depression is only medical, it's only biological, right? That seems to be more like the common sense understanding, like to deal with depression, you have to do these sort of things, right? And so I've tried to show in this talk is how these two singers, right, Roan and Rodrigo, and Roan is the one who's been officially diagnosed with depression. Rodrigo's a little different, right? She has all these negative feelings, but she doesn't pathologize as like depression, right? But they also offer us kind of like a complication of the medical model, right? They're saying, well, hold on, there's also all these social things going on, right? With Roan, it's like, I got famous and all of a sudden I became depressed. I should be happy. Like, who wouldn't want to be famous, in front of like 100,000 people? Like, that's what I dreamed for, but all of a sudden I feel so depressed, right? And Rodrigo, I think what she shows us is how, similar but differently, right? Like her having to be a racialized other, right? A minority, a racial minority, an Asian American, does cause her to feel insecure, right? It's like, I'm not as pretty as that blonde girl, and she talks about that in Driver's License, right? And she went through that in real life with Sabrina Carpenter, right? Who's now become very famous, obviously. So I think yeah, exactly. So I think what you said is 100% right. I mean, I think if someone says depression is not biological, I mean, that seems to be maybe one step too far, right? Of course, it has a biological basis. But what I've tried to do is just complicate that a little bit, because I think that is more the common sense in a way, right? And say, well, hold on, think about all these social factors, right? Because who would say, I mean, you're depressed, the cure is sisterhood. You know what I mean? Like, not many people would say that, right? But I think what they show is that, actually forming community, right, feeling less alone, these can be very helpful things, right? And that points to a more like the social model. Does that make sense? Or you can follow up if you have questions or...
No, I think you took my words and made them make sense.
Okay. No, well, that's great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. But yeah, thank you so much. And I definitely think that what you just said, definitely reflects a lot of what, especially Roan would say, right? Rodrigo's different because she doesn't talk about depression as much openly. So, but thank you. Yeah, it's very fair.
Can I say one more thing? Yeah. So, when that quote where she said, "Is it my period?" I really felt that as an individual with depression,
Right?
Because in my experience, that hormonal imbalance at that point further affects the depression and makes it worse. So that's something I also experienced. So I felt that.
Exactly. And so exactly so those hormones, right? I mean, I've never been through puberty, so you can explain that better than me. But exactly, going through that biological moment of the month or whatever you want to call it, right? That's going to affect, like you said, your hormones and then your mood, etc., right? But then again, what I try to show is that puberty is also gendered, right? Being a girl makes fame worse. She's like, fame is like puberty. So she's comparing a sort of social condition to this biological thing, right? So it shows how puberty is both biological, but also experienced socially too, right? I mean, just because puberty is a physical thing doesn't mean it isn't also experienced socially in a society, right? Like, what do we do to accommodate puberty, periods? Not a lot, right? Or puberty or whatever, right? So, anyways, yeah. So again, just kind of what I'm trying to do is show how that's both biological but also social. So yeah. But thank you.
Other questions?
I think these ties are really interesting, and I'm really intrigued to hear what spurred on this research for you.
Sure.
Just in general, like what made you think to dig into this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll admit I'm just a huge Olivia Rodrigo fan. I don't like Chaperone as much. When Sour came out, I'm like an old middle-aged guy, and I love Sour, and I was like, this album just speaks to me, and I just became like a huge fan of it. So what happened is that oftentimes with my research, I start with teaching. And so what I did is I teach a class called Capitalism and Aesthetics. So it's our literary methods class. And I try to pick fun stuff. We watch like Spring Breakers, that movie, if you've ever seen that. So I try to pick fun topics. And I've been thinking about sour feelings and what Sinai calls ugly feelings. Because for her, ugly feelings are related to capitalism. She says today during capitalism, we have these feelings, right? And we all feel like powerless. Right? Like what do we do? Like we want to change the world. We all have some ways we'd like to change the world, but how do we start doing that, right? And she says like, things like anger and fear are more classical passions that can lead us to action. But what about irritation? Like what do you do with irritation? Like it just lingers with you, right? And it kind of makes you impassive, right? Or anxiety or jealousy, right? So it's actually the song Jealousy, Jealousy. And then Sinai is a whole chapter on jealousy. So being like an academic and a big nerd, I heard jealousy. I was like, oh, it reminds me of Sinai. And so I went to the book Ugly Feelings, which I'd read in grad school, and I read the chapter on jealousy, and I started making this connection between Rodrigo and jealousy and how. And so then in my class, we did a whole section on, we listened to Sour, and then we read Ugly Feelings. And so I basically asked my students, are Rodrigo's sour feelings ugly feelings? And that's her paper. And like half say yes, half say no. Whereas I think they are. Obviously I've tried to argue that here. And so that's how it started. And then I just started digging more into it. And then I gave a talk on Livid Rodrigo at PopCon in LA last April. So I gave that part of the talk there. And then I gave the talk on Chaperone in Paris this summer at the Depression Popular Music Conference. And so, and then I started thinking about, well, actually, these are both related in some ways, right? It'd be interesting if you juxtapose these two people, because they are friends, they've collaborated, right? But I also think that they're interesting because they're different as well, right? Liv Rodrigo, right? She's a racialized other. Chaperone is gay, etc., right? Different sexuality. And so this talk is a way to think about them together. Right, and I want to continue thinking about them, juxtaposing them, like I think you said, right? I think about them, because I thought about them separately, but this was a good opportunity to think about them together, and I want to kind of continue that. So, what about yourself? Are you like a fan of these artists, or?
Yeah, honestly, when my professor like prompted it to us and everything, I was like, oh my gosh, I love listening to Olivia Rodrigo as well. Like that would be really cool, and I think it's so like contemporary and really interesting, like applicable to everyone.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested about how her third album will be. So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, that's a cool thing being a professor in English. You can just do cool stuff. I'm like, I like pop music. I want to study this. And so now it's just become my field, and I do a lot of work in pop music studies. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Anybody else? Questions or comments?
Ask whatever you like. You can challenge me if you want. Ask me, for ideas or whatever. So.
More of like a comment. I come from the discipline of information science.
Okay.
And we talk about sense-making theory.
Okay.
As, we all kind of have these gaps in knowledge, and we're finding ways to make sense of these gaps, fill in the gaps. And it kind of struck me that, you were talking about how Chaperone uses the medicalization of depression to kind of make sense of her experience.
Yeah.
And then also, I think there's kind of like a lot of that going on in this, but also that as these artists discuss their depression and their experiences, they're also kind of adding to the conversation through which other people are trying to make sense of their experiences. And yeah, that's really all I had to say. But
yeah, no, I think for sure there's like a big feedback loop, right? It's like, okay, so they say something, and then these are two of the biggest artists in the world, like Olivia Rodrigo Sour is like the fourth most streamed album. So that then affects the way we think about things like depression. Is that what you kind of mean? It's kind of like a feedback loop in a way, yeah. I mean, that's why I like popular music. That's why I like popular forms like life writing, memoirs, pop music, because the things that we're all engaged with all the time. Like with my students, right? They're like, we love Rodrigo. They're like, oh, I think deeply about this now. Like I think this in terms of feelings. Like I never thought about that before, right? And so, yeah, what I try to challenge my students to think a little bit more deeply and critically about these things. But we're always taking these things in passively, right? In a sense, and it's always affecting the way we think. And so what I like about teaching popular music is that it forces my students to kind of start thinking and criticizing and be more critical of things that they're always taking in. Right? I mean, the way Olivia Rodrigo talks about jealousy has, I'm sure, affected certain people, What does that mean, though, and how has it affected me? And I also do love to have my students think, like, reflectively, right? Do reflective papers on pop music and how they relate to these things. I just had a student give a talk on Harry Styles' Falling, the song, and how that really helped her during COVID. So I do a class on interdisciplinary studies, and we do a section on pop music, and so she talked about how that song really helped her during that time, to get through COVID because she could relate to the song and what he was describing, etc. So I don't know if it wasn't really a question, but just just tried to add on a few things. So, but thank you. Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
So, as someone from one of the dreaded sci fields, I think
Okay.
it's very interesting hearing a strong focus on the social aspect here, because in psychology, we long have focused on, like, okay, there's this medicalization, there's the fact that there's these biological factors, you have a lower than normal level of dopamine, you know,
Right.
we look at this aspect, but less on the social factors.
Yeah.
But like as a social psychologist, I often look
Okay.
at and say like, okay,
Right.
things like social support, which were mentioned here, are critical.
Right.
And I think it's interesting hearing it from this sort of perspective,
Yeah.
where we look and see how the importance of having connections, having
Yep.
people that you feel like you belong to and are accepted by,
Yeah.
is critical to things like well-being.
Yeah. I guess I could say a few things. So yeah, I would say for sure, like obviously this place is very critical of the size, like very critical, right? And it's for a long time, it was just like the medical model was just, like it was just the worst thing ever, right? But even this guy, Lamar Jarrell Bruce, who I really love, there's something called, have you ever heard of MAD studies? Okay, so it's like it's another field alongside display studies, which tries to think about these things more socially, more critically, right? But thinking more about madness as this thing that has this long history, et cetera, right? But even he says in there, right, is that we have to think about what the good and bad of psychiatry. Like I think I quoted that earlier. I can't remember the exact quote, but just sort of like we think about what good psychiatry can do, right? It can help you in a certain way, but then we also think about structural changes too. Right, I think that's maybe the limits, perhaps, of some of these psi fields. Right? Maybe not, though. You could maybe disagree, But how do we think about more structural changes? What do we think about things like the gender binary and the way that can oppress certain people, right? The way we think about gender, race, etc. Right? So, yeah, he's saying we need to think about what good psychiatry and the psi fields can do, but we can't stop there, right? We have to go beyond that in some way, think socially. I have a student actually in my interdisciplinary studies class this semester, and she's a psychology major. And so my class is part of the display studies minor we just started. And so she came in like super in love with the medical model. It's been sort of interesting watching her over the last 2 months, kind of starting to become more critical of it and think differently about it, right? And so, yeah, I've seen that actually happen with one of my students this semester. But yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think that's really good then,
Yeah.
because we as a field have
Right.
not been good at this. Like, sociology's been much better about handling things like gender, sex,
Sure,
all of
right.
these different topics.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, it's tough. I mean, psychology's gone through a lot of issues, like can we recreate these old famous studies, et cetera, right? And so I think this other challenge can be sort of seen maybe existential for this field, like how can we exist if we adopt this model, right? But yeah, I'm glad there's some push and pull, and maybe someone like you, are you interested in display studies, or?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's very interesting. Like, this
Yeah.
is one of my first exposures
Okay.
to it. So
Good.
I think I see like a lot of overlap in how psych can give interesting aspects to this without necessarily feeling threatened like it would have in the past.
Right, exactly. It's like, yeah, exactly. How do we try to bring them together in a certain way? But yeah, I would definitely recommend things like MAD studies for you. I think that'd be a great thing to read alongside your psychology text, just to give you a different perspective. And if you want suggestions, I'm happy to talk after, whatever. So, but yeah, thank you. I'm always happy for comments too. It doesn't have to be a question, But just love learning from other students at other institutions.
Anybody else? I think we have time for one more, maybe.
Everybody's
Maybe.
tired. It's almost 6:30. Ready for dinner.
Um,
Did you have another question, or I didn't know if you had your hand out? I don't think there's nobody else. So if you want to ask, you can. you what? Sounds fine with me. I have more questions. I love to talk and answer questions. Or if you have a comment.
So, you said you really like Olivia Rodrigo's music,
That's true.
and then quoted that she identifies as emo and says that she does emo music. Are you interested in any less popular emo artists?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So go back to what you were saying about Olivia Rodrigo, because I think one of my things is I was like, why do I love this music? And I was like, well, maybe because we're both Asian. I'm Canadian originally, but like Asian American, Asian Canadian. So that was kind of a thing too. I was like, because no one ever talks about Olivia Rodrigo's race, really, ever. Like that she's very white passing, right? And so I was like, okay, well, maybe that's my connection. Maybe we have this sort of structure of feeling that we both can relate to, even though we're much different ages and, different genders, et cetera, right? But yeah, so that was my connection to Olivia Rodrigo. But in terms of emo music, I must admit, I've never been a big fan of emo music. I kind of grew up I have a friend, if you're interested, I have a friend who's putting on the first ever emo music conference in Columbus, Ohio, which is coming up sometime I have a lot of friends who are really into emo music. So that's actually one of the things I need to research more is emo music and how that's affected. But I don't know if you know, actually, Dan Nigro is another connection between Olivia Rodrigo and Chaperone. He produces both their music. And he was in an emo band. I forget the name of it, but he produces all the big hits Rodrigo has and all the big hits Chaperone has were produced by the same guy, Dan Nigro. So he might be somebody for you to look into and listen to his music, etc. But he was emo. And so he's been a big influence on both of them, bringing in that sort of emo sound. And Olivia Rodrigo, I think, loves that sound too. But I think what's interesting about her is how she's doing it from a more female perspective, right? Like gendering in a certain way. Because oftentimes emo music was seen as very masculine, right? And so, like one of the critics said, she's helping us to kind of rethink emo music in a way. But yeah, unfortunately, I must admit, I've never been a big emo music fan. So I'm trying to think. I mean, I grew up like My Chemical Romance and people like this, but it was never really my thing. My sister liked them much more than I did. And so I kind of got it through her playing it in her house. But yeah, maybe there is a band. I just can't think of it right now. So no, I was never a big emo music fan. Sorry. More pop music and hip hop were my two interests. So
I actually love My Chemical Romance.
There you go.
I got to see them live in Toronto a few weeks ago.
Nice. That's amazing. Yeah, emo music is having a revival. So a lot of these old bands are coming back and having concerts. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I want to just say a couple of things before we close. The first thing, going to be a little pedagogical here for a minute, but in in my disability studies class, we pretty recently read Tobin Sieber's Theory of Complex Embodiment. And so I just have been thinking, this is such a great talk for that because I think we often think of Siebers as like combining medical and social, but he's really saying embodiment matters 100%, yep. The social matters 100%, and representation matters 100, right? It's like
I teach
there's
that in
no
my intro display
way,
size class.
right?
I should bring them in. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just I love how it's not just about how these artists are representing or thinking about depression themselves or pushing back against, I don't know, a medical or social model, but that their actual music is a form of representation that then impacts how we think about depression, right? And then how the experience of embodying that, even if it's, also biological, our experience of it has everything to do coming through the lens of that. So I think that's really wonderful. And I also, now I'm just gonna make a pitch for our disability studies minor, which is if you're not a disability studies minor, you should be one. And you can declare at any time, and I would be happy to talk to you about it. But if you found this interesting, you would probably find some of those classes interesting as well. And then the last thing I wanna do is just thank Dr. Mangat again for this wonderful talk. Can we get, yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. No, it's fine. Yeah, it's. I know. Listen, really. Okay. That Dan Nigro's part of it that you like? No, that he was in. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. The new research for my postdoc is like radical. I've never listened to it, but I'll have to. I mean, he's so influential in pop music.